All right, welcome back to the Built to Grow podcast. I'm your host Tim Lyons in a special Zoom podcast, joined as always by Randy Angston. What's up, buddy?
Hello, my friend. How's today?
Hello.
Oh,
We got
happy
a
St. Patty's Day.
happy St. Patty's Day, top of the morning, and we got a special guest coming actually all the way in from Boston, Beantown, and he was just telling us about the Boston parade and the debauchery going down at the parade. Brings a wealth of gym owner knowledge. Now he's out there selling and slanging gyms. Brooke Hartnett coming in from Trans World Business Advisors. What's up, buddy? How are you?
Yeah, good. Thank you guys. Pleasure to be here. Long time listener, first time guest.
Long time listener, first time. Fantastic. Love to have those long time listeners on the show. It's Boston. It's St. Patty's Day, but it's also a Monday. So probably not too crazy out there today. Or maybe I'm wrong.
So they actually ran the parade yesterday. So the debauchery was yesterday.
Ah, makes
So
sense.
this is the post debauchery Monday.
The
Makes
debauchery
sense.
hangover.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, listen, Brooke, I'm excited to have you on the show because, at the end of the day, we're building businesses over here as gym owners. And while it provides a great lifestyle for gyms, hopefully you're making a ton of money. There's going to come a point in time, it's time to sell the business. And, we had a little kind of a pre-call a week or two ago, kind of talking about the challenges that we both see with gyms and making and creating value out of them. And I would love to kind of get your take, but before we do any of that, give us a little background on you, Brooke. You were a gym owner, and now you've kind of come to the selling of gyms. Give us a background.
Yeah, so I was a gym owner for a few years out on Long Island where I grew up and kind of got stuck out there during COVID. The longer backstory is I was in the military for a few years and did a physical job there and kind of landed my way into the fitness industry after I got out and I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do and figured out I loved that and ended up buying the gym that I was working at really right before COVID. So I ran the model there and really changed it from like a 1099 style packs and sessions gym to more of like, the good model of, we're going to run, monthlies, we're, selling on value, or, having a team approach to training. So I negotiated that deal myself from a guy who I worked for, had friends at the gym, had a lot of clients at the gym, and we can get into a little bit of why that was a huge mistake. But all the trainers walked, all the clients walked. We were literally starting from nothing. So I ran that for a few years, learned a lot about business, ended up selling that and moving up to the Boston area and getting into business school and falling in with this company here and really throughout process figuring out how much I like the business transactions and looking at a lot of different types of businesses and I love helping people with what I'm doing now.
hmm hmm
Awesome.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. In business acquisitions is a big scary topic. It seems like it could be a big scary topic. I know we're going to simplify it here. Let me ask you this, man. What side of the fence do you like better, being in the gym owner space or selling gyms? Which one?
It's a little different, it's when you're on the ground in the gym, I mean, you have a lot more face-to-face interactions with clients. It's a little bit more of a happy business. In the transaction world, it's still happy because I mean you're helping somebody transition out who really cares about what they're trying to sell to a buyer who is really cares and who's excited about coming in. So it's a little different, still exciting, but there's certainly that kind of contentious piece whenever you're doing a deal and there's negotiations. It's a little stressful. So I think management wise, I love the transaction stuff. The personal stuff, I like the gyms.
Yeah,
That makes
got
a lot
it.
of sense.
Well, give us this is something we kind of talked about just before we hit record. Like there's a big difference between the gyms that make or sell for big dollars and ones that you're going to go online and go on Biz Buy Sell and see a gym selling for 30 or 40 or $50,000. And it's so wild to me that somebody or a gym owner or whoever this was that created this gym, created this path And here they are, they're selling it for $30,000, their life's work, perhaps. And then there's other gems like, we've had some in the Iron Circle exit their gems for, seven figures, and it's vastly different. Let's get into that and what you're seeing right now, at least in the gym selling or I guess listing space. What makes the biggest difference?
Yeah, so it's just I guess a little bit about background about how I work in the company I work for, which is Transworld. We work with a lot of different industries from home service to fitness to professional services, medical. So I see a lot of businesses, I see a lot of deals, and what I've really learned in this position is how to drive value from a business, especially in a sale. But I think for this conversation and anybody listening, the value that you're getting from a sale is also going to be, what you're seeing, you know, in your pocket when you're still running your business, even if you're not selling it. So I think that's something super important to keep in mind here. In terms of actually getting into the nitty gritty of what's going to value, your business higher on the market to a buyer is cash. That's probably your number one thing we're looking at here is numbers, because that's really what's going to get you your best number on a sale. If you cruise biz buy sell or loopnet or any of those other business or real estate transaction sites, and you see these very very small numbers of things for sale, usually with something with that small of an amount, they're probably selling the stuff. So there really
Yeah.
isn't much of a business
Mhm.
there. So, I think, the first thing that I just really want to point out and, I think would be a good discussion point is how do you capture the value of your business? So not just your, fully depreciated $30 dumbbells, which you're not going to get any value on. So we want to position this as a business sale that I know you've taken a lot of time to build. You have a great reputation, you got a great website, you got hopefully some great customers and employees in there, and you do a lot of work. So that's the number one thing that we're looking at with folks, and kind of the number one thing you'd see on the market is there isn't really too many businesses that are being sold. When we work with folks, we're going to do a lot of help positioning your business to the right buyer to get you as a seller the best offer. But
Hmm.
that's a lot of it's a lot of I don't want to say manipulation because that sounds like a dirty word, but it's positioning for who
Right.
we're talking to. And I think the reality with that is that you can do a lot of work a few years out to position yourself better, so you get a better number, because that's always what it comes down to is confidence.
I think
Got
that's
it.
a good point. You keep kind of mentioning the fact that like even if you're not in the position to sell, or you're not even thinking about selling, doing these things or putting this type of structure, in the business is what's gonna give you that position in the future. You know what I mean? So it's like there's no downside to doing this type of work and making sure your business is set up this way.
Right, right. And I think, going back to kind of knowing your numbers and understanding your numbers, I think it kind of comes back to, I would highly encourage everyone to, probably track your income and expenses on something like a profit and loss sheet. And that's, something that, if you don't have a bookkeeper or any fancy accounting systems, that's fine. Like pull up a Google spreadsheet, you know, will show up your, go on your CRM, whether you're using MindBody or something else, put up your revenue up top, marketing, people,
Hmm.
utilities, phone, auto, whatever whatever you're writing off in there, throw those expenses down there just so you're clear with it. What is what you're looking at and managing is going to help you get better at it and as you fully understand it. But I guess as we're talking about that with a sale, that's really where we're going to start to drive value from is just understanding, your income and expenses and figure out, really what you're actually making. And that's where you're going to get your multiple multiplier from for your valuation price, which is going to get you to your sales price.
Gotcha. And I would assume you're looking at tax returns more closely than, say, P&Ls.
Ultimately, yeah, and that kind of comes down to probably where somebody's getting their money from. SBA loans are super popular right now. We work with a lot of SBA lenders, so I can kind of put my SBA lender hat on and kind of get in their shoes with what they're going to look at and really help drive the early conversations with folks of what's your best go to market price. So I'm going to put my lender hat on and say, look, a lender is going to lend based on your tax returns, and lenders are not creative. They're going to look at it and they're going to say, look, the business made X, profited Y, this is what we can lend on, and that's it. So, really in the few, probably 2 to 3 years, three if you want to be safe, two for sure, leading up to a sale. So you want to make sure your numbers are super, super clear on your tax returns. And that might mean you're paying a little extra taxes, but
That was
you will certainly
That's
see that back on the end, which I know is a
that's
dirty conversation.
that's where my head was going, man, because everything I do is to not pay taxes. I have all kinds of strategies in place, and I would probably show a huge negative many years on my P&Ls, even though we're very profitable.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing there's going to be a lot of back end work that needs to show. How the hell did you pull that off with this, right? And so I'm guessing these would be called add backs, or what do you call them?
Yep, add backs or adjustments. And that's something that we spend a lot of work on with folks in the beginning of the process because unfortunately, probably 70% of the people, like regardless of the industry, come to us when they're ready to sell now. I wish I had more conversations with folks who are, looking a few years out who would kind of get the, air quoting market perspective on how somebody would look at this kind of stuff. But we spend a lot of time with folks in the beginning going through numbers, and then in the buyer packets that we present, the confidential buyer packets that we present, we always have adjustments and adjusted financials in there that says,
Mhm.
this is how this guy's running it here. This is how it would look if you were doing it like this. And all of that's completely fine to do. It really is. People expect that. Lenders expect that. Um, you know, Everybody expects that throughout the process because everybody knows, the way you're running a business is a little bit different than what's actually happening on the number sheets. So that's something we work on. But the point being is as little as possible would be fantastic, and as
I was
because it helps drive more confidence in the process.
that was going to be my question is like, what do you see as the difference between a business that on paper and taxes is reporting it all versus the one that's, a relevant business that's
Yeah.
adjusted? Does it affect, total valuation or like you said, confidence maybe in the buyer?
It's more confidence than anything. So like I have a HVAC business we were working with, which always pops to mind when I have this conversation. Where they take they're doing like 600K in revenue, and they take the business down to like negative 200 every single year on their tax returns. But the guy's taking like a $250,000 salary. He's writing his auto off. He has like his home internet and whatever the hell else, HBO subscription in there. So, that's all stuff that's fine to write back, but obviously there's massive adjustments on there. And would they be accepted from a lender perspective? Sure, they definitely would be, but it just doesn't really look great. So
All right.
it probably would drive a lower sales price because it doesn't look fantastic.
I feel like it's a this is a catch 22, both in lending and future lending for yourself. If you're going to buy a property or a commercial building, you're trying to mitigate taxes, and then it bites you in the butt by not being, lendable. So I've always said that. So now it's also biting you in the butt when it comes to selling and valuing your business. So
Yeah,
fun
and
stuff.
yeah, and I guess just to kind of round that point out, I guess is I always say to people, the way you're running your business is completely different than the way you're running it when you're trying to sell it. Meaning, again, in those 2 to 3 years before you're really trying to sell it, pay the taxes, show the numbers. When you're not doing it, don't do it because nobody's looking at that stuff except for you.
Got it. All right. So we talk about in gym businesses systematizing, the experience, for example, and having a plan around delivering, I guess for the sake of this conversation, personal training or your classes or whatever. Um, and the big thing for us is we lean on software, semi-private pro, for example, in our business. But then there's gyms out there that, it's up to the coach today. How does a coach want to train today? What's the workout today? They come in and they write it up 20 minutes before or even 5 minutes before the class starts. As a buyer coming into a business like that, what are they looking at? Is that gonna impede the sale if it's always up to the coach or it's changing all the time?
Yeah, I mean it certainly will. And where this would kind of come into play is not only with numbers, but also, when we're getting close toward the end of the deal and we're actually talking about the training and transition period.
Mm,
So, once we get through the fun part of everybody asking questions about numbers and making sure that they have their financing lined up, probably a couple weeks before closing, we start talking about like, okay, how are we handing these reins over? How are we making sure everything's smooth so there's not a drop in business, so there's least disruption to customers and employees as possible. In situations where there's one an employee or maybe the owner who's highly dependent on the way the business runs, it is much more challenging to get that transition done, and then probably more upstream, even getting a good buyer to give you a good number on the business. Because in the case of one of your employees who's writing the programming for the classes, a buyer's first question is, what happens if that employee leaves?
Yep.
What happens? Do we lose the clients? And then again, back to the end of a deal, when a buyer transitions, they're worried about retaining employees and customers, which of course the seller always super helpful with. But we can't ever guarantee employees are going to transition over.
Right.
So, God forbid that, somebody doesn't like the new owner coming in for whatever reason. That trainer leaves who's writing, 30, you know, 30 of your weekly classes programming. We
Mhm.
not only lose the employee, but we're probably losing customers.
Have you ever seen
So if
Yeah.
have you ever seen a business value go down at the you've done the numbers, you kind of agreed on this number, then you get into the training transition portion, they find all this out and like, oh my gosh, this is what I thought it was. I can't take this on, I'm out, or even, hey, like you wanted 500, I can only give you 350 or whatever.
So thankfully, by that point, we're probably negotiated through the deal to where these are really just checking the box transition pieces. If there was questions in buyers' minds about that, I probably wouldn't even get an offer on the business. So that's how important this is that we're talking about, again, spinning the story and talking about the truths of how the business works to the buyers early on, so we don't get to that point. And I think we do a pretty good job of that, to where I've never had that happen because we're, brutally honest with our sellers and then brutally honest with our buyers that, hey, this is how the business runs, like it or not. Do you want it? Yes or no?
All right, I'm going to throw a shameless plug in here because we have the solution in semi-private pro. It's programming that's owned by the club or the gym, and the coaches don't program, and it's delivered via tablet, so it's no systematized. Are you telling me that that's going to make a business more valuable?
I think I will, Tim.
What's that? Say that again for the people in the back.
I would rep and warrant that 100%.
I mean, it wasn't designed that way, but everything that we do is to systematize operations, and this is being a great tool for that. I mean, I'm just thinking from the buyer's perspective. I don't have to worry if that trainer leaves, or I don't have to be the one. The owner was doing the programming. I don't have to be the one that has to figure out how to program or hire somebody in. It's all handled. That's a big deal. Okay, moving on. I just wanted to throw that
Yeah.
out there. I mean, I
it,
mean, it makes
it
total
it
sense.
it makes a lot of sense, and I think you'd see immediate ROI on something like that just in your gym right now with that sort of product. I mean, I just think back when I used to sit there and write hand programs, give them to coaches, watch the coaches struggle with progressions and regressions, and
Mhm.
have inconsistencies between coaches of what clients were getting, what progressions and regressions, and be like, well, coach so and so told me this, Brooke. I'm like,
Mhm.
okay, like, just a couple different ways to do this, but I'd always go back to my coaches and say, look, like this is our regression for that. Like we're just gonna all do it the same way. If you want to do it a different way, great, but let's just all do it the same way.
Great, but let's do it this
So
way,
Yeah.
or you're fired. All
I'm
right,
with you.
let's get into this.
Right.
This is a controversial topic when it specifically comes to valuation. I think only you are gonna be able to answer this. Um, you know, well, not necessarily reoccurring revenue, but like term contracts or open-ended memberships when it comes to valuation. Because everything on paper to me would point towards, hey, you've got reoccurring, or not a recurring, but like an annualized, I guess, accounts receivable in a way. We have contracts that total $480,000 of accounts receivable, versus, hey, anybody can cancel in 30 days or less. They can leave. Is there any difference when it comes to the value of the business, or are they just looking in retrospect? What did the business do?
Definitely a little bit of both. So any sophisticated buyer is going to ask for AR, accounts receivable aging reports. We have folks ask that on plumbing businesses, HVAC businesses, landscaping. We always get that stuff anytime there's some sort of, repeat customer service. And the more clearly we can show that, again, the higher confidence level that we're going to have from buyers. And, really, you know, depending on the situation, the higher multiple we can use to sell the business because it's guaranteed, booked, repeat cash,
Hmm. Okay.
100%.
Now the complete opposite of that is somebody that's selling sessions or paid in fulls. I would assume a sophisticated buyer might say, how much of this past revenue was paid in full that we still have to service even after you sell it? I'm not collecting. Does that come into the equation at all?
Yeah, it does. Because depending on what kind of numbers you're looking at, it could really overstate your revenue, depending on, what kind of accounting practice you're using. We had a personal training studio we're working with actually a couple weeks ago where we had it under contract, had a buyer. They started to dig into the numbers, doing due diligence. And hey, they figured out that this business isn't making 30 grand a month. They made 60 grand in January, and now we're in March, and the revenue for March was like 10 grand because they had a massive pack sale in the new year. So it completely changes your numbers and cash flow, when you're doing, paid in fulls, which, I think there's a time and a place for, but, again, it's from a valuation perspective, from a buyer perspective, they really want to see some recurring revenue. It's the paid in fulls and packs. I think we could go down a rabbit hole for that, but it has a tremendous impact on the way you can value the business if you have some sort of recurring, consistent revenue.
Got it. And so that buyer backed
Agreed.
out, I'd imagine.
The buyer backed out, yeah, and this trainer, this is the gym owner, is an operating owner who taught, did 40, 50 hours a week of like one-on-ones, ended up booking all of that pack money as revenue, putting it in their pocket and going and spent it, when in reality, like the way you're supposed to do that accounting wise is book that as unearned revenue and realize it when the
Mhm.
service has been performed. So, again, the way you're running your business is different than the way you should present it and run it when you're selling. But, you probably don't want to do that when you're trying to sell your business.
You nailed it. I mean, I would say, with the best of intentions, everybody plans the other way, and the second that cash is there, it's spent. I mean, we
Yep.
we, we
Yeah,
talk against it all the time.
they find ways to spend it. Don't, I mean, it's just human nature and I get it, but everybody says, I will do what you said. Put it in a drip account, realize it as we're performing. No, you won't. No, you won't. You just
Right.
won't. You just won't do it. So it is what it is. I mean, now here's the other kicker, right? Like back in my first book, Built to Grow, the whole premise of this podcast was based on that book. We talked about the cash flow quadrant. Robert Kiyosaki was a big deal in my life. The guy's here local. I've seen him speak. And it really talks about being self-employed versus being a business owner. And really the difference between the two is how involved is the owner in the day-to-day operations? Does that owner need to be in the gym for that thing to run and hum and make money and do all these things? Or is the gym owner, has he been able to systematize the operation to where it doesn't matter if it's him or you or a new buyer comes in, the business is going to run. Now, the question I have for you is like, is anybody that's a real buyer really looking for a self-employed role or more of a business owner role? Has it changed the value of the business? Like talk around that topic.
Yeah, yeah. So, I talked to sellers about this kind of early on in the conversations that there is no good nor bad with this. It just is, and there's a way to get through it, but we just have to be in reality about what we're talking about here. So let's say it's you in an 800 square foot space and you're training, 40, 50 hours a week. Is that sellable? Maybe at the right price. Are you going to get a massive multiple on that? No, you're not. So, the question kind of comes back to like, how would we even position that? And, you were kind of getting into that. You would position that as a job. And that's just where you'd have to be very, very conscientious on your asking price, knowing somebody is buying your job, which I think there's value to. Somebody gets a big leg up in the business, right? If they're looking to open their own studio, maybe they get a base of clients. Maybe that seller would help stay on and help transition so everyone, is successful with that. But that is a very, very hard sell because any single buyer who's looking at that is going to say, why would I pay, let's just say you're making 100 grand, right? It's like, why would I pay 100 grand when I could just go work at Equinox for a salary and make 100 grand?
Yeah,
Right.
why am I taking on the risk and
Yeah,
the
no
burden?
risk.
And yeah, that's a
Right.
good point.
And, with something like that, I mean, there's massive key man risk, and a buyer, and is going to be thinking about that, because if the seller leaves, like what's going to be the loss with clients, even if the seller stays on?
That
So
was gonna be
something
my
like that. Yeah.
I mean, obviously, it's
No,
gonna
go ahead.
gonna vary, you know what I mean, based on that setup and involvement of the owner and things. But is there a, I mean, I guess I don't know if you'd have the data because it kind of takes place after the sale, but is there a typical fall off? Or, let's say a business is system dependent. If you're able to sell that business, is there still a portion of that clientele that's just not gonna move over too? I mean, what have you seen in the fitness industry?
So in the fitness industry, let's say, let's look at the other end of that example with, a well systematized business. You're running your guys semi private pro software. You're able to onboard trainers and customers into the system where, you don't need, Bobby writing the workouts at 5 a.m. for 30 different classes. Something like that is a completely different model because, there's diverse scalability, right? I'm not dependent on Brooke being there today. We can have Caroline come in and run the class. So, as you kind of get toward the training and transition and kind of the post sale, the reality is that there is some customer and employee drop off. You know, Depending on the owner's involvement in the business and kind of that training and transition or maybe employment agreement, you know, you're probably looking at around a 10% fall off. You might lose a handful of employees. That's, completely normal. Most folks work that into their models as they're going through the process that we're probably going to lose something. Now, the question is always how can we mitigate that loss as much as possible? And when you have some sort of scalability in your delivery mechanism and in the way that you're marketing and doing sales, um, that loss is mitigated, and again building buyer confidence to give you a higher offer in the process.
Got it. I
Yeah.
mean, music to my ears because this
Yep.
is what we teach to, right? We coach to. I'm glad you're also saying it because it's, you know, because I gotta say, at some point in time, no matter how young you are, 20s in your mid 20s, like when I started late 20s in your business, you're gonna get gray hair, not want to do it anymore. So like, why not create a model and build all the systems around something that is sellable? So when you do want to ride off into the sunset, you call Brooke and he's got a buyer waiting for you. It's just an easy deal. You get the most money for it. And you're not sitting there sitting on this business trying to figure out who the hell's going to buy it, or even worse, like lock the door one day and never come back type of thing.
Yeah.
I've That also happens quite a bit. Get nothing for it. The lease is up, and guess we're going to not sign that and close the door. Do you see that quite a bit? Probably in a fit.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, and it makes me sad, because
Sure.
there's inherent value behind what you built, whether that's a big number or a little number. Like there's something there to, there's something there that you can get value from because, a business is a living entity. It has a brand, it has a reputation, people know it. There's certainly something there. And, again, I really wish we had more conversations with folks earlier on in the process and, helped better position themselves for success
Mhm.
because you deserve to get something from what you built. You really do.
Yeah, that's the thing that pains me the most because I'd hate to see it because I'm in it right now. Like I can't imagine 20 years of your life and then to build something and then you just lock the door one day and never come back. Like that would be probably
It's
the
like a
worst
death,
thing.
like you said, it's a living entity. It's like a death. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's the end of something that's yeah.
Kind of
I
just
mean,
like jumping
it's
off a bridge,
heartbreaking.
giving up a little bit. In a way, you're kind of just giving up, right? So the point to this message is, guys, is like you got all the information here. We'll get into some more, but like, why not fix the stuff now? Like when you do have time, you're not looking to sell today. Brooke said he wishes he would have these conversations 2, 3, 5 years in advance. You're having it right now. Like this is literally happening. So like this is your opportunity to make the changes that will allow you to ride off into the sunset with a Mai Tai in your hand, do the thing. Real quick, Brooke, you hear multiples, that word multiple a lot, and every industry is a little different. I would love to hear your take on the fitness industry's multiple and what changes that. What does the multiple mean? What is it multiplying? And how do we get that multiple up? Like what's your advice?
Yeah, so a multiple is a valuation term that's essentially referring to the way that we're getting to your, valuation or asking price. So essentially we're looking at a addition problem, an addition solution, I guess, of true owner earnings, true owner earnings. So you can think about that as profit. So the business, what we figure out a normalized profit for the business is owner salary, non-operating expenses like some of your write-offs, like amortization, depreciation, or interest. All
Mhm.
those are added back. And then all of the regular owner benefits that you might see on a tax returns, and also the things that, make small business kind of awesome, right? Like your drive to work, you're going to write off your auto, you might expense some meals out on some work dinners, buy some pizzas for the team. Those are all meal write-offs. You can all add that all back, travel, education, those are all discretionary expenses for the business. But, when we're figuring out what the true operating profit of the business is, we're going to factor all of that in. So we spend a lot of time with folks early on in the process, making sure that we're understanding, what is the true profit that an owner is making from this normalized. So let's say if you weren't doing those things, what would that profit and loss statement or tax returns look like? So that's the big conversation in the beginning with folks. And then from there, we're looking at industry comparisons, market reports to figure out what the multiple that makes sense is. So I'll tell you for the fitness industry, going back to, Brooke and his 800 square foot space, you're probably looking at a multiple of under one.
Under
And under one, that's probably what you're looking at. Just super realistic.
and you're saying that Brooke doing the training 40, 50 hours a week, maybe making 100 grand with the
You're
profit,
probably
what you pay yourself. What you're saying is somebody might buy that for 50 grand.
Probably,
Yeah.
probably 50 to 75 would be what I would guess.
Okay. 10.
And the reason for that is because you're replacing a job. So
Yeah.
thinking about, an under one multiple, depending on the size of the business and that normalized cash flow, you might be looking at somewhere in the mid threes is really what I would say. So let's say, you're making around, I don't know, 1.5 to 2 million or so. Let's say you're profiting like a really healthy, four, 3 to 500 grand or so. I would push for upwards of a three multiple on that, especially if you can show some sort of, well put together operational structure. You have some recurring revenue in there. There's low risk of loss upon a sale. I would push heavily for a three, a 3+ multiplier on that,
Got it.
because it widens your buyer pool. You might not get someone who wants to go in there and coach sessions or classes or whatever all day. You're looking at a different type of buyer who's willing to pay more for a better business.
Love it. Yeah.
That's massive. I mean, that is the I mean, basically what I heard was the systems carry that weight. I mean, to go from under one to three changes the whole picture.
It's completely different. I mean,
Yeah.
we again, like, so we primarily work with sellers. That's who we really represent. So that's kind of the frame in which I'm talking about this. we work with sellers to maximize their sales price, which means, we talk about how the business, how we need to talk about it to get the seller the best number. But having done this for, a while and looked at hundreds and hundreds of businesses, the brutal reality is that if you're doing a lot of the sessions and you're coaching a lot of the classes and it's really important for Brooke to be there, you might not even sell that business.
Yeah. Yeah. It's true. It's a harsh reality, guys. I mean, I'm glad we're coaching the way we are, Randy, because this is exactly to the
Oh
point. Like
yeah.
just hearing it from somebody else reiterate is even it just feels good, It's like we're guiding everybody in the right path here.
Yeah.
And again, I think the worst nightmare is that 20-year gym owner, and we've worked with them too, Brooke. I mean, we work with a guy who'd been one-on-one training for 40 years, and if he wanted to go and take the wife to vacation, the gym would close for a week, and it's like the
Right.
whole business ran. Yeah, in not knowingly, I think gym owners and this gentleman in particular never thought about the exit. Never
Right.
even thought about it. Like one day I'm not going to do it. And he just, didn't value his own time or whatever it was. And it's unfortunate. I'd hate to see that ever.
Yeah. Yeah. And the tough situation with that is the length of time he's ran that business is probably going to hurt him because those are deep relationships you have with those
I
clients.
didn't even
Yeah.
think about that
You
too.
you know, it's super sad, but that probably would hurt you.
We discussed
Because
that was going to be one of my questions because I discussed that with that gentleman when we had our initial conversations about bringing some systems and structure to his business. With that involvement, like I mean, if you're on the floor training and I mean that relationship with the owner, like I can see that massively affecting fall off, and then obviously the value of what those contracts and client book looks like.
yeah, yeah. And so taking this out of the fitness industry for a second, we just had a plumbing business close a few weeks ago. Nice little business. They were doing like 1.2 in revenue. The seller was making around 600 or so. He had two other employees. Now, this is a business that ran for 40 years. This guy worked 6 days a week, probably pulled 70 hours. Like him and his wife did the books on Sundays. He was going to the supply houses and picking up all the stuff. Now, because he was making so much, there was room to play for buyers,
Yeah,
right?
because
There's
they
good
would just
cash flow there.
pay somebody to do his job, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, great, good cash flow there. But, this guy had post-it notes on, the hood of his car for scheduling. He was taking all the calls to his cell phone. That business sold for, about $1 million or so. And, you know, which is a nice little sale. Probably 10% of businesses sell for over 1 million. But if he had some systems in there, like he probably could have got three times that. He probably should have gotten around, probably should have gotten around 2 million for that if he had some systems in there. So, I know we went through a lot of things here. Like you don't have to do everything in one day. You don't even have to do everything if you want to sell, but doing a couple things here will really, really help.
Big time. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So, all right. So, what would you say? I guess the final word here, advice. You were a gym owner yourself, not ever thinking. I'm guessing you just closed your business at the time, right? You just moved on into another role. Okay. So,
Yeah.
if you could tell the Brooke of old, some words of wisdom, now that you know what you know, what would that be?
Yeah. So the way that I closed my gym was essentially we were, I was ready to move out of my hometown and move up here. We ran that business for like a year and a half or so, and essentially we, stood there for 2 days, like hawking off kettlebells, kind of thing, right? We're like asking 50. One of the members would come in and be like, "I'll pay you 40," and I was like, "But 45." So miserable experience, super, tough experience. And my reflection really on that has been, you know, there's a way to capture more of that, running your business like a business. Now I had employees in there and we were running something organized. And, at the time I didn't really know how to capture that value, or how to talk about that or that maybe there was even something there. So, I guess kind of going back to, I know, you guys speak about, the E-Myth and traction and, Built to Grow, I think was, or Built to Sell, I think was one of those books. Running your business like a business is probably the number one thing that you should really be thinking about, is making sure that you're not solely dependent on the way the business operates as much as possible. That's an evolving process. Like, you're not going to go and hire a GM day one. But having some sort of methodology around why you're doing what you're doing will provide value to you now and also value in the future to a buyer.
Fantastic. I love it.
Spot on. Right in alignment with what we preach every day. So I love
Man,
that.
almost like I gave you a script or something. Fantastic, Brooke. That was awesome. I mean, you guys, we talked about a ton of different things. You're probably going to want to re-listen to this one a couple times. We'll put Brooke's info in the show notes. We'll get it from you after, Brooke, and we'll put it in there. If you want to reach out to Brooke and have a chat, I'm sure you do do you do quick evaluations with folks? Just kind of rough estimates and stuff?
Uh, Everything. Yeah. I'm always happy to talk shop with people.
Mhm.
In case you're wondering how I get paid, we're completely performance based on the sale. I have a lot of conversations with people who aren't ready yet, who we end up talking to for years and years before they actually end up working with us. And I always tell people, like, please, let me know what you're looking for. I'm happy to talk to you about anything.
Mhm.
Um, you know, Happy if you want to work together down the line, or if not, I'm happy to have provided some value to you and hopefully, improved your life and what you're doing.
Yeah, fantastic.
Love it.
Well, Brooke, thanks for joining us today. That was a wealth of knowledge. I appreciate you, man. Go enjoy some green beer today, maybe.
Absolutely.
There you go.
All right, guys. That's it for this episode. Hopefully that helped you out. Until next time, keep changing lives. We'll see you on the next show. Bye. All right. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Built to Grow podcast. If you want more help growing your business, join our free Facebook group, Profit Accelerator, helping training gyms grow to $30,000 a month and beyond. We'd love to see you there. Go check out the show notes for the link and keep building something great. And we'll see you in the next episode.